All right, AP Euro folks, here we go. Let's crush this. We're going to hit a couple topics mega fast, right? We're going to crush it. So we've got Germany. So what do we have to know about Germany? So this is the key to understanding. If you get this, you'll understand the 20s, 30s, you'll understand the Nazi control over Germany, you'll understand all of it, I promise. So the key of understanding Germany is what happens in the closing year of the war. So all the way back to 1914, the British had been blockading not just like a port of Germany, all of Germany. So the people have been starving, right? They've been really struggling to get food. Factory workers are not being paid. The food shortages are becoming a problem. And so by 1918, there's little revolutions. There's little socialist and communist demonstrations. Factories sometimes are shut down due to protests. In essence, the nation is being paralyzed from the inside out. So the war is being fought, right? But the ability to create ammunition and supplies and feed the troops is diminishing daily. Because of this inner turmoil, Kaiser Wilhelm II packs up his bags, he abdicates and leaves Germany, kind of rudderless, right? Without the captain at the helm here. And so what happens is the new government that is formed is something known as the Weimar Republic. It is a democracy. And right away, within the first week of the construction of the Weimar Republic, they will sign an armistice looking for a ceasefire to World War I. Now, what that means or what that does, though, is it unleashes this anti-government fervor, something known as the stabbed in the back theory. And I know I mentioned in class about little Adolf Hitler here with his clown stash, but this was a very common feeling, right? A lot of German soldiers and a lot of conservative kind of dyed in the wool, people who went back to Prussian unification of Germany, they looked at this as betrayal. And the betrayal came from democracy, right? If they had Bismarck, if they had Kaiser Wilhelm I, this wouldn't have happened. But this new weak Weimar Republic and their democratic principles, weak. The factories would have kept running and the bullets and the food would have been produced if it wasn't for these communists and these socialists and these unions striking to shut down the factories. They were un-German for the way they had behaved in 1918, right? They should have suffered on so that the soldiers on the front line could do their job. That creates this really broken society of militaristic, bitter veterans, people who thought that Germany could have won the war. Okay, so one group known as the Freikorps also looks like some 1920s boy band. I love, hello, yeah, my name is Hans. Very, very handsome. But these guys were kind of a precursor to Nazi, brown shirt bully tactics. So the Freikorps would just be disgruntled old soldiers that would, meet in these meetings and go around and beat up socialists. They'd beat up liberals on the streets. It's kind of more like an organized gang. One of the big moments was a woman named Rosa Luxemburg, who was the head of something known as the Spartacus League, which was a socialist organization, right? It was like a socialist, kind of quasi-communist workers' party. And these former soldiers killed her. They assassinated her. This is the level of street fighting that we're talking about. Okay, I show you this because at the end of the war, communism kind of popular, but notice, right, within a year, communism is growing in popularity. But so then is radical militarism, right? So what eventually would be kind of known as like Nazism is also growing in popularity. Now, something that really will impact this is hyperinflation due to the Treaty of Versailles, right? So Germany was supposed to pay all these reparations. It started at 36 billion. Eventually it was like up to 55 billion with interest and inflation. The currency tanks. And that's not just because the stock market crashed, right? The currency crashes in Germany for a couple of reasons. One, Germany is a highly industrial nation that does not produce enough of its own food or essentials. And so they import to feed the people and then they export to make money. Well, the export market collapses, right? So in the 20s, demand for industrial products collapses. And so German industry falls flat. To make up for this, the German government prints a ton of money, and that means hyperinflation sets in. And so what happens to the mark is it completely devalues, honestly, in the span of months, it collapses. I actually have here at school 100 million Deutschmarks on one note. They didn't even bother to print it back on it, right? It became useless. So the British and the French are unhappy with Germany because they're not paying their bills. And when they try to pay their bills, they're paying the bills with this useless money that nobody wants. And so instead of taking the money, France just takes Germany, right? They start taking over the Ruhr River Valley, which is the industrial heart of Germany. Most of the factories are located in the Ruhr, the neighboring valley. The Saar Valley is where all the coal mines and iron mines are. And so the French take payment then in resources. So there you go, a sign showing the French coming over and stealing. All right, so Hitler taps into this stabbed in the back theory, into this intense militaristic nationalism, and he uses it with his National Socialist Party, what would be known as the Nazis. In 1923, that's the year after Mussolini takes Rome, he tries the Beer Hall Putsch, which was an insurrection, a rebellion in Munich. It fails. He's arrested and spends some time in jail, where he writes Mein Kampf, which is not just his struggles, but it's kind of the manifesto of this National Socialist movement. And one of his big things that he really focuses on is how other people are to blame for Germany's suffering. And so part of what he blames is the United States, France, England, right, nations that have, through the Treaty of Versailles, right, have punished and hurt, crippled Germany so it can't be an empire. And so the debts that were owed to those allied powers were partially to blame. All right, and so he intended to not have Germany pay off these debts. And he looked at, again, we talked about before, he looked at the socialist strikes and the communists and those people as a reason that they had lost. And so they were the problems. If he looked at factories, he looked at the Jews as a problem because they were only caring about profits and they didn't, have a war economy that just kept the war going. They cared about getting paid. And so you're not German. You're not German. You're not German. It was all everyone else's fault, right? And so he looked at communism and socialism as being a Slavic disease, something that came in from Russia, right? He looked at liberal, I shouldn't say liberal, but like classical economic liberalism. He looked at that as a Jewish disease, right? There was always somebody else's problem. And so by the time we get into like 1933, where Hitler becomes elected chancellor, you'll notice that radical parties like the Communist Party had grown a little, but had become flat compared to its early popularity. But Nazism, this intense militaristic nationalism, was becoming quite popular. I'm going to skip through Italy here, which we've already talked about. Again, economics were rough everywhere. The 20s really witnessed hard times for industrial and nations, not even getting into the stock market collapse of 1929. So England had problems as well. They made strikes illegal. They tried to stop unions from tampering in politics or getting involved in political things. So I'm saying this was a global trend, right, across the scale here. So let's look at some art of the 20s, and we'll be done here. So hopefully we'll have a chance on Friday to look at some World War I art just real quickly. By the time that we get to the 20s and 30s, art takes this radical kind of revisionist approach. One of the key themes of the time is something known as Dada art or Dadaism. And so I picked this one from Duchamp just because it's probably, in my opinion, not only the most famous, but the most easy to understand. All right, so you take something as iconic as the Mona Lisa, something that should represent humanism and the genius of man and this great moment of realism and beauty. And then we vandalize it, right? We draw a mustache and goatee on there. And so the point, though, is that everything is not only nonsensical, but are there really any virtues that are untouched? Does man actually really have humanist value? Or in the end, are we just greedy, meaningless, militaristic beasts, no different than any animal of nature? And some more Dadaism. Again, it usually looks stupid and nonsensical, but there oftentimes is a message here. So you got a rich guy going here, a busted old vet here, some super shady looking factory owner over here. You got the worker faceless and sad, kind of heading off to work. And this guy looks conniving and, maybe even maniacal. It shows the state of German society. So here we got some of the upper crust of Germany. Look, he's got a little swastika, right? The beginnings of nationalist socialist movement. Look at this guy's brains. I don't know if you can tell. He's got crap. I mean, it's a big pile of feces up in his head there. He's crap for brains, right? So you've got all these idiots with the sword, with the military, trying to steer on radicalism, but they're all idiots, drunks, and radicals in the end, right? The other artistic style is Cubist art or Cubism. Again, it's supposed to be kind of a dissection of art. And so instead of having realism and detail, we use geometric shapes and more linear approach to trying to portray things in a not realistic, but in kind of a new approach to catching the impression. So this is post-impressionistic, where the message matters more than the fidelity or accuracy of the art. Okay, and so then lastly, if you thought it was bad, it gets worse. So in 1929, the stock market collapses, right? And so what had already been a very rough decade brings things even tougher. And so in the 1930s, right, we see Hitler rise. His policies do actually help bring Germany to a point of coping with the Great Depression. When we think of FDR in American history and what the New Deal with lots of federal work programs, Hitler had a very similar approach, which again is ironic that he used socialism in his war against socialism, right? But he spent a lot of government dollars to have people build things like the Autobahn or factories, so that eventually Germany not just had jobs for people, but long term would have things that would help them be successful as a modern state. And they used the Autobahn to move their military so they could blitzkrieg during World War II. And so always planning and building. Right? So that leads us up to World War II. All right, guys, hopefully that helped. Auf Wiedersehen. Well, kind of gross reference. I'll see you later.